Hi, I'm Justice Lee. Welcome back to Finance with Lee. Today we're going to be talking about debt. Is it good? Is it bad? Should you have it? There are some people that say you should never have it. There are some people that say you should use as much as you possibly can. Today we're going to talk about it. So yeah, I'm sure you've heard it everywhere that there's a lot of people that talk about debt and they say that it's bad and you should avoid it at all costs. I'm wondering who exactly is telling people to do this. They must want you to stay poor because obviously, debt is a very powerful tool that can be used to make you wealthy. Just consider it. Do billionaires use debt? Think about Warren Buffett, Jeff Bezos, all the rich billionaires that you know. Are there any of them that haven't used debt? Some people are going to say, all right, well, Pablo Escobar had billions of dollars. He sold a lot of cocaine and he was extremely rich. Well, okay, I'll concede that. I mean, Pablo Escobar was very, very rich and he probably didn't use debt, but I guess if your plan is to sell a lot of cocaine, I guess you've got to pick your poison. You can either use debt or you can sell cocaine. Also, there's some dictators, like maybe, in a country that isn't exactly free like our country is. There are dictators who seize their country's assets and they have a ton of money because they took it all from the people that probably should own the assets instead of them. So some very smart people will probably say, I know of some billionaires who didn't really use debt. They sold equity in their company. In other words, they sold stock in their company and said, hey, you can be a partial owner of my business in exchange for giving me some money. That's essentially the same as using debt, in my opinion. People who sell equity instead of debt, they're doing the same thing. They're raising money and they're promising to pay back eventually. So instead of just paying the money back with interest like debt, the understanding that the two parties involved is the person who's funding the company and receiving equity in return is actually going to have more value because they purchase shares of that company. They're just two different ways of doing essentially the same thing. Selling debt and selling equity are essentially the same. So you're not really differentiating people that sell equity and people that sell debt. It's not really that much of a consideration. So one thing that I've heard from everybody is, well, a mortgage is perfectly fine, but you should never have a car loan. Under no circumstance should you have a car loan. It's just terrible. Think about that. Never have a car loan? Seriously? Like, there has to be exceptions to that rule. An 18-year-old that's just getting out of high school and he's just getting a job, but it's not really close to his house. Let's say it's 15 miles away. Okay, he could ride his bike, but if he lives in a climate where that's not always possible, right? What if it's 100 degrees outside? I guess he could be that super sweaty dude with armpit stains that go all the way down to his underwear. I mean, I guess that's something he could do, but does he really want to be that guy? So yeah, let's say he gets a job and he's right out of high school. Let's say he rents an apartment that's very affordable, but it's about 15 miles away from where he works, and he gets a job and he's making $20 an hour. So what should he do? Should he just take an Uber every day? Should he take an Uber to work every day? I mean, that doesn't make sense to me because you're going to be paying a lot more. If you could buy a car, let's say you buy a very modestly priced, reliable car. Let's say you have a $150 monthly payment. Is that worse than having to take an Uber to work every day? Because trust me, I've driven for Uber for a long time and I'm very familiar with their pricing model. It's going to be pretty expensive. It's going to be a lot more expensive than if you would just buy a very moderately priced car. There's also some exceptions. All right, what if this guy joined the military and he lives on a military base and the Uber can't drop him off there and he needs to go to work? Let's say he has a family. He lives off base and he needs to drive back and forth. He needs a car. Again, what if he works at a secure site? What if he works at a power plant and the Uber would have to drop him off a mile from work? Is it worth him having to walk a mile to work every day to not have this car payment of $150 and still pay for an Uber every day that doesn't quite get him all the way to work, but it costs him way more than just having a car? That's absolutely ridiculous. So somebody who said, never get a car loan, that's a terrible idea. There's no exceptions to the rule. I'm a hard, fast, dictator about that. That's absolutely ridiculous. There's no reason why there can't be exceptions. And if you're 18 years old and you get that $20 an hour job, should you be buying a Maserati? Of course not. But there is some room for being reasonable here, okay? There's also debt that's less than inflation. So inflation, some people say it's as low as like 2% or 2.5%, but most people think it's around 3% long term. So in my opinion, if your interest rate is less than 3%, then it simply isn't worth paying off at all. I mean, obviously you want to make your payments, but you're basically getting that money for free. And if you pay it off, there's an opportunity cost associated with that. If you would save the money instead of paying it off and invest it into stocks, then obviously if you're going to make 7% in stocks or you're going to have to pay 3% interest, I would rather get the 7% in stocks and continue to pay that 3% in interest on the loan, because your loan is basically less than inflation. If you have a mortgage and your interest is less than 3%, I mean, I don't really see a huge reason to be motivated about paying that off, because you can just pay that off and basically get yourself 3% by doing that. But that's basically inflation. And if you were to invest that money instead of making extra payments, you would be making 7% or more, right? Obviously, this is a guaranteed 3%, whereas the stock market, might lose money or it might gain more than 7%. But on average, over a long period of time, you're way better off just investing that in the stock market than paying off a really low interest rate. There aren't many people who disagree with this, but there are still some that say, no, never use debt, never use debt, never use debt. Listen, if you're going to buy assets, and to me, I subscribe to the Kiyosaki philosophy, which is an asset is something that makes you money. So like going and buying a car is absolutely not an asset. People say buying a house is an asset too. I don't believe that a house is an asset unless you're renting it out. A house is a liability. You have to make a monthly payment on that. Do you need a house? Of course. And is it a good idea over renting? Yes, in many situations it absolutely is, but a house that you own and live in is not an asset because it's not making you money. It's a liability. It costs you money every month. That money is coming out of your pocket, and you have to figure out some other way to pay for that. So I absolutely believe in getting loans for assets, right? So if you're going to buy real estate or invest money for business purposes and you think you can make a lot more money than the debt payment would be, then you should carefully consider getting that loan, obviously. But if it makes sense, it's almost certainly going to be worth it in the long run. So obviously there's risk. People say, well, you just can't take the risk. I mean, you won't be able to sleep at night if you're taking that risk. If you can't sleep at night because you have debt, then maybe you shouldn't get it, right? Is it worth your quality of life? Probably not. But you're probably never going to be rich. I'm just going to be honest with you. You need to be willing to take some risks in life, okay? And you can minimize your risk by making sure that you do your research first and make sure that you're investing in something that's actually going to be a good deal. Simply put, sometimes you need to take risk, and debt is a risk, but it can make you a lot of money. Whereas if you didn't take any debt, it would take you years and years and years to get to the same place that you could if you actually did use the debt. So I just wanted to go through a quick example to show you my point about debt to buy property. So in this example, we're talking about a $150,000 property, and I'm using real numbers here, okay? I'm not making any of this stuff up because I have seen properties like that. These are pretty similar numbers to what I'm seeing on rental property that I actually own. It's a duplex. So let's say your down payment on one is the whole thing. You just put $150,000 down. Obviously, you're not going to have a mortgage payment, and you're going to be paying taxes and insurance. And let's say that's equal to $200 a month. Your expenses are going to be $400. Let's say that's for capital expenditures. That's going to be for fixing things. That's going to be for vacancy. And then your rent is $1,600. So if you take your expenses and your tax and insurance and subtract that from your rent, you're making $1,000 a month in cash flow, which is pretty awesome. You're making $12,000 a year, okay? And your appreciation is going to be $4,500. I'm going to say that this property goes up in value, which that's what appreciation is. It's when something goes up in value. I'm going to say your appreciation is $4,500, which is 3%. That's pretty average for a piece of real estate. Some places obviously are a lot more. If you live in Los Angeles, you've seen some pretty awesome appreciation recently. But if you live in most of the country, then you've probably seen around 3%. So obviously your monthly principal payment, which is how much you're paying down on the mortgage every month and actually getting that in equity, is zero because you don't have a mortgage. And that adds up. So if you add the $12,000, which is your cash flow, $1,000 times 12 months, and then add that to your appreciation, your total net worth went up by 11%. So your total gain, your return on your investment, which was your $150,000, was 11%. So you made like a little over $16,000 and you made 11% on your money, which is pretty good. That's better than you'd get on average in the stock market. So real estate, obviously I'm going to have more videos on it, but it's a powerful way to make money. But you're not going to make as good of money as if you put 20% down. So on the second column, you'll see you put $30,000 down, which is only 20%. Your mortgage is $900. Your taxes and insurance are included in your mortgage. Your expenses are only $400 a month, and your rent is $1,600. You make a cash flow, so your $400 plus your $900, and you subtract that from your $1,600, which is your rent. You're making $300 a month, and your appreciation is still the same. So you still own the property that is worth $150,000. You get to take advantage of that full amount of appreciation. So you made $4,500 just because the value of the property went up, which if you compare that to $30,000, that's 15% just right there in appreciation alone. Plus, every month that you make your mortgage, you're making a principal payment. And I know your mortgage is $900, but because of the way mortgage amortization works, which I'll go into in a later video, you're only really going to be paying off $100 of that balance every month, which is pretty small, but it is something, and that's $1,200 a year. So at the end of the day, your total return that first year of owning this property is going to be 31% on the amount of money that you put in, which is $30,000. Basically, that $150,000, if you had that full amount and you could just plop it down immediately on a property, you could actually buy 5 properties if you just put down the 20%. Of course, I'm not accounting for closing costs, and obviously your closing costs are going to be much higher if you buy 5 properties than if you only buy a single property. I'm not going to lie, but if you look at your total return, it's such an enormously higher number that it's going to make up for it, especially after the first year, after you've already taken care of those one-time closing costs. So this property example is a great example of where you can use debt to absolutely multiply your earning potential. Obviously, it costs you money. So if you're using 5 times leverage, you're not just going to make 5 times as much because you have to pay interest for debt. But it's still much, much more powerful, and it's a much better way to use every dollar that you have, especially when you don't have a ton of money, to maximize your returns. I'm not just going to sit here and say, yes, you should use debt. It's absolutely great. Go max out your credit card. Go buy a car, a Maserati that you don't need. So I don't think you should have consumer debt, right? Do I think you should go buy couches and put that on financing? Absolutely not. I think that's a terrible idea. I don't think you should ever have credit card debt. I talk about using credit cards, but you should never have debt, right? When your statement comes out on your credit card, you have 30 days to pay the balance in full before you get charged any interest. And if you're not doing that, you should not own credit cards. I absolutely love credit cards, but if you can't use them responsibly, it's fine. Just admit that to yourself and don't use them. There's nothing wrong with that, but just make sure that you're not having credit card debt. It completely defeats the purpose of arbitraging credit cards. So financing anything that's really not an asset, to me, doesn't make a lot of sense. I said obviously there can be some exceptions, like a car, something that can really end up helping you make money in the long run might not be a bad idea, and everybody's situation is different, so you have to determine that and do the math on your own to see if it makes sense. But just saying that debt is bad really just takes a tool out of your tool bag to help you do the things that you want to do and get what you want to get out of your life. So I know this is a little strange, but I like to compare drugs to debt, okay? So drugs can be used to treat, cure, prevent diseases when they're prescribed by a doctor. And obviously, they save a lot of lives and they increase the quality of life for many other people. I mean, with what's going on in the world, I think everybody knows that, right? There are a lot of drugs that can straight out cure a disease, or they can make the effects of the disease shorter. Or in the case of like opioids, they can relieve your pain, which makes your quality of life substantially better. But I think we've all seen it. Drugs can absolutely be devastating to people, right? They can destroy lives, kill people, ruin families and marriages. And society has seen a lot of negative consequences from people abusing drugs. Debt's the same way, okay? Debt can absolutely make you wealthy, and it can give you things that you would never be able to do without it, because it's basically other people helping you out. They're saying, I have money, you don't, but you have a way to actually make more money out of it, and I kind of don't really have any more time on my hands to use the money to the maximum effectiveness. So here, I'll give you some of my money. Just make sure that you can get me a return with it, and then you can better your life and you can better my life. So financing debt is really a win-win situation in a lot of cases, because the person who's loaning the money really wants to be able to get something out of the money without having to work for it themselves. But you don't have money, but you have time, and you can work for it, and you can multiply that money, then give them a return and give yourself a return. But everybody probably knows someone or a lot of people that have used debt in a terrible way, and it has awful consequences, right? Just like drugs, it can really destroy your life. It can ruin families and it can ruin marriages. And I think that money is one of the number one leading causes of divorce. So obviously you need to be very careful when you get yourself into debt. Every single time you open up some new debt, you need to think about that very, very carefully. One of the things I see is a lot of people will go to a car dealership and say, oh, I'm just going to look. And then they end up getting a car that they don't need, and they end up spending more money than they plan to spend. And they just go ahead and get the financing through the dealership, and they have this big monthly payment. And then a couple of years later, they regret it. So my way of thinking about it is, if I get debt and it's good debt and it's going to make me money in the long term, sometimes I regret it right away because I'm like, oh no, what did I get myself into? This might be a little risky. But over time, I end up really, really liking the decision I made, and I end up getting happier and happier with the decision as I see my gains go up and up and up. But on the other hand, usually when I make a bad decision with debt, I'm really happy at first. I'm like, oh, everybody check out my sweet new car that I just bought using all this debt. It's super awesome. But then after a few months, my brand new car is kind of old news to me. I already know about it, but I still have this massive payment that I have to make for years and years, probably like 5 to 6 years, and I'm just waiting for that debt to go away. All the good debt that I bought and investment properties, I'm like, yay, that did a great thing for me. At first, I was scared because I was like, who knows how this thing could turn out? But as I made more money and as I was able to save more and more money and have a bigger and bigger buffer, then I was happier and happier. So just try to consider that. Think about long term. In 5 years, are you going to be happy about this, or are you not going to be happy about this? And just think about, what is that going to do to my net worth? Is my net worth going to go up because of this, or am I going to lose out on a large opportunity? If you buy a car for $20,000 when you're 20 years old, you're going to lose out on so much opportunity in the future. If you would invest that $20,000, that would be worth so much money. Just put it into an investment calculator. Use the 7% for stock market. Let's just say you put that in an S&P 500 ETF and you just use a 7% return. Look at how much money that would be by the time you're 55, 60 years old. It would be a ton of money. But think about what that car is going to be like when you're 55 or 60. Are you going to look back at your life and say, I'm so glad I bought that $20,000 car. If I would have gotten a less expensive car, I wouldn't have enjoyed my life as much. And I'm glad that I don't have the money that would have come as an investment because I have those fantastic memories with the car. Something tells me that you're really not going to care that much about what kind of car you drove when you were in your early 20s, but you are going to be beating yourself up by saying, wow, I could have invested money and I missed a huge opportunity. So I've heard the following. Well, people that have been in debt before are the people that should definitely avoid debt at all costs, right? If they've gone through a program where they've paid off all their debt, they should not get back into debt under any circumstances, because they're like an alcoholic, right? Once they go back to drinking again, they're going to get themselves in trouble. All right, well, I don't subscribe to that philosophy. I believe that people can change. I believe that people can learn. Okay, just because they've made a mistake in the past doesn't mean they should never be able to enjoy the benefits of debt again. I think that's absolutely ridiculous, because if you've seen the negative consequences of debt and you've taken out a lot of bad debt and you know how that can harm you, that doesn't mean that you should never be able to get good debt and be able to take advantage of debt in order to make your life better. So I think that's just a bad way of thinking about it. So did you learn anything about debt? I'm hoping that I was able to maybe shed a little more light on debt and my philosophy behind debt. Obviously, I don't think that all debt is good, but I think that there is good debt and there's bad debt. Just like I made the example about drugs, there's good drugs and there's bad drugs, and there's a right way to use it and there's the wrong way to use it. So if you believe that you should never have debt, then that's fine. I'd like to hear from you in the comments section below. Please like and subscribe and tell me what your thoughts are, because I love learning about finance. And if you have something to say that maybe I've never heard before, or a new perspective that I've never thought about, then I'd love to hear it. So this is what I think about debt, and I've been successful with having good debt. And I've also had a lot of negative experience with bad debt, and I've really learned a really hard and expensive lesson, and I'm trying to share that with you guys. Good debt, you should absolutely do it. I've made a lot of money off of good debt, but I've also lost a lot of money off of bad debt. So just keep that in mind. Try and make the best possible decisions you can. Think about everything a lot before you make a decision. Never get into a situation where somebody's convincing you, hey, you need to get into debt right now to take advantage of an opportunity. Trust me, there are always opportunities. That's not the only opportunity. If they say the opportunity is going to be gone tomorrow, just ask yourself, why? Why is that opportunity going to be gone tomorrow if I don't get myself into a huge amount of debt today? So I'm going to be trying to post a new video every week. I appreciate you guys watching. Have a nice day.